Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and this channel is all about health, wellness, and designing your dream life. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about your brain and how it's keeping you stuck and limiting you from reaching your goals. I know a lot of people, myself included, get stuck in this cycle of wanting to start their new habits again on Monday. And then they try really hard, but they ultimately fail, and then they say, I'm going to start again on Monday. And it's just this vicious cycle where you keep going over and over and over again. It might be that you want to wake up at 5 a.m., or you might want to start a new diet, eat healthier, go to the gym more often. But ultimately we end up right back where we started and we stay stuck. And today I want to talk to you about your brain and how it's keeping us stuck. So our brains are really good at survival. We have within us this innate survival instinct. And this innate instinct tells us that we need to find food and conserve energy, which is exactly what we end up doing. We buy pizza and we sit down and watch Netflix. In our modern day society, it is super easy for us to do this survival instinct. And ironically, it's actually what's making us obese and making us sick. But back in our Paleolithic days, that's not the case. We had to go out and hunt and gather and find our food. And we had to conserve energy because we didn't always know when our next meal would be. And that is now so ingrained inside of our brains, inside of our minds, that it's really hard to overcome. This idea of eating less and exercising more goes against our very survival instincts. If we didn't consciously fight against our brains, we would end up sitting on our couches all day long with a heap of dopamine-inducing snacks and the ultimate Netflix marathon. If you've ever seen the movie WALL-E, then you know what I'm talking about. You know that that's where things are headed. So we know that our brains are in control of our emotional and our physical state. When we feel stressed and we feel tired, like we do often when we come home from work, we try and find a way of coping with these feelings, of pushing them down, usually in an unhealthy way, so we don't have to feel them. We try to avoid them. And we often do this by either sitting down and watching Netflix, or grabbing a glass of wine, or eating some kind of food that's really high in sugar or fat content. And all of these things are going to make our dopamine spike. And if you don't know what dopamine is, it's a neurotransmitter and is essentially responsible for pleasure. Now, at the same time, dopamine is actually released to other areas of our brain, areas that are responsible for things like memory, motor function, attention. Essentially, what it allows our brains to do is remember where we were, what we were eating, what we were feeling. So we now have this ingrained inside of our brains that when we feel stressed or we feel tired, we can give ourselves alcohol and TV and junk food to make ourselves feel better. And we know exactly where we were when we had it. We were sitting on our couches or in our bedrooms, and we know where we got it from. And because our brain likes dopamine and it likes that pleasure response, it says, remember this. Remember this feeling. And so next time, because our brains are so efficient, it helps us to repeat the same process. So the next time we feel stressed or we feel tired, the brain has this automatic response of, okay, this is how we coped with it last time, and this is what worked. Eventually, over time, this becomes a habit. It becomes an automatic process. You already, on your way home from work, start to think about those things. You form an association between being stressed and being tired with eating junk food. And eventually, even on days when you're not stressed and you're not tired, you remember the same context. You remember that you're on your way home from work and you're about to sit down onto your couch. So even though you might feel really happy, you had a really good day, you still develop those cravings. Now, this whole process is a thing called classical conditioning. And it's more than likely that you've already heard of this study. So there's a study called Pavlov's dogs. Essentially what happens is some researchers bring in some food to a dog, and at the same time they ring a bell. And they do this repeatedly over and over and over again. So eventually the dog hears the trigger, which is the bell, and expects the reward of the food. And over time what we see happen is that the dog hears the bell and expects the food, and he'll start to salivate even before the food is presented. So how this applies to our own scenario is, initially we're triggered by stress and by fatigue, and we give ourselves the reward of TV and junk food and alcohol, which releases that dopamine, and we feel good, we feel pleasurable. Over time, we associate our environment with that dopamine release where we feel good. So even without the trigger of the stress and the fatigue, we still end up having cravings as soon as we sit down on our couch or as soon as we're on our way home from work. Now, this is so important. This is the takeaway here, is that our stress and our fatigue triggers our cravings, and we remember our environment. So even when we don't feel bad, we still have those cravings. And we wonder why we have these cravings all the time. It's because we've associated our environment with that dopamine hit. So how do we overcome this? How do we actually unlearn these behaviors? Well, in the experiment with Pavlov's dogs, is that he actually unlearned it. They had the trigger, which was the bell, but no reward. So the dogs start to expect that when they hear the bell, that the food's not going to come. Now, the important lesson here and how we actually use this to help change our habits is that we need to change the trigger. So there's something that triggers each of our habits, and they become a bit of a cascade. One habit triggers the next, which triggers the next, which triggers the next. If you think about your morning routine, you probably wake up on the same side of the bed. As soon as you get out of bed, you do the exact same routine. You do the exact same steps over and over and over again. And we can use these to our advantage in order to stack our habits. James Clear talks about this in his book called Atomic Habits, where you use one ingrained habit to stack it onto the next. But we can actually use the reverse in order to change our habits. So basically what I want you to do is do the exact opposite of what you would normally do. So if you would get out of bed on the right side every single morning, I want you to get out of bed on the left. If you always eat breakfast and then immediately brush your teeth, maybe eat breakfast and then get dressed and then make your bed and do something else and then brush your teeth. If you always take the same route to and from work, maybe try a different route. If you can just make small, tiny little changes to the way that you do your habits, then the whole thing unravels. And the more you can do this, the more you can unlearn those behaviors. This might be even something as simple as sitting on a different end of the couch or in a different chair. Anything to break that association between your typical habits, your typical triggers, with those cravings. The very first step into doing this is to actually become clear on what your triggers are and what the habits are. For example, I never used to make my bed in the morning. I wanted to develop that habit, so what I did was actually stack it with opening my blinds, which was something that I did every single morning. So now, as soon as I open up my blinds, I make my bed. I have a trigger and then a response. As soon as my blinds are open, I make my bed. So you need to become clear of what your own triggers are. Once you become clear on what your triggers are and what the associated habit or response is, you know that you can break those things. If you don't do the trigger, then you're not going to do the habit. And then the final step is to find new ways to cope with your emotions. So even though you're feeling stressed and you're feeling tired when you come home from work, which might actually be the trigger in itself, you need to find a different response. So instead of immediately coming home and sitting down onto the couch, maybe you just go out for a walk. So those are the 3 steps to help get unstuck. Clear on what your triggers and your habits are. Break the habit by changing the trigger and changing your routine. And then you need to find new ways to cope with your stress, the emotions, or the triggers. Alright, that's all for today. If you like this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I upload new videos every single week. And I love to hear from you guys. Leave me a comment down below what your trigger and your resulting habit is. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!